Is there like a thing for MCP, like the YMCA? I don't know. Anyway, in this video, folks, I want to take you through Zuplo's very awesome MCP server capability and just show how easy it is to add an MCP server to an existing API. That API might be managed by Zuplo, or it doesn't have to be. You can just use the MCP server feature of Zuplo by importing your OpenAPI doc. What we're going to do in today's demo, I'm going to just create a new whiteboard here. We're going to obviously have an LLM we're going to use. We're going to use OpenAI's Playground. I'll show you that in a second that we're going to plug in. And somewhere over here, I have an API. It's going to be a good old-fashioned to-dos API. That's what we like to use for demos. I have an OpenAPI document that I'm going to use to import into Zuplo. So what we're going to do is, in order to enable this connection, the AI Playground is actually the MCP client, and the LLM is behind the MCP client. We're going to create an MCP server so that LLM can actually talk to my API. That's the only way you can get your data and services really truly exposed to an LLM today, like OpenAI and Claude, etc. So we need an MCP server for that. What we're going to do is deploy the Zuplo gateway very quickly. We will do that by importing an OpenAPI doc here for that API. And then we will add an MCP server to Zuplo. I'll show you just how crazy easy that is. And then we can connect our LLM to that. I'll show you a live demo of that, and that will then talk through here. What I'm going to show in this demo as well is some of how the governance that you might have built into Zuplo just works, or the things you've got in your API just work. And I want to spend a minute talking about one of the fallacies of software factories that I see so many people using for MCP today. So one common approach to MCP is that you have an artifact here, you have an OpenAPI document, or a Swagger doc, as some people call it, and then you use some tool, some open source tool, to generate some code that you probably then go and change in some way to add some behavior, add some specific metadata, and then you publish that as your MCP server. And that seems nice, it's very quick, but it suffers from something I think of as the fallacy of software factories. I used to work on this with the patterns and practices group at Microsoft. We had a software factory sort of working group. And I actually just won't use software factories anymore. I hate them. And the reason I hate them is this part of the life cycle here. Where you take a model, let's call this the model, your OpenAPI, and you use that model to generate code. This is great as long as it's reentrant, as long as when the model changes, I can just regenerate the code I need and deploy that easily. The reality is you always need to update the code in these things. In some way, you need to customize it. And what happens then is you update the code in a way that is very procedural and intrinsic and implicit, and you then have a change in the model, so you have some new endpoints or some changes to the endpoints in your OpenAPI. You now generate code and you're stuck here again. You are stuck at this point where I need to update the code, I need to remember the changes I made, and maybe it's not even your model that changed. Maybe MCP changed, which is happening a lot. This is a very fast-moving standard. And there's a bug found in the implementation you used. You need to generate that code again. You're back to updating this code. It's not re-entrant. Zuplo takes a very different approach to this. Zuplo dynamically generates the MCP server basically when the request comes into the runtime. So we do it in real time. We actually generate the MCP server based on the configuration of your gateway, which is pointing to an OpenAPI doc. We have a very slick way of re-importing your OpenAPI doc. And we get out of this entirely. And the place where you add policies is in your gateway. So if you want to add customizations to the code or the way that the API behaves or the authentication or the rate limiting, you do it in here. And this is re-entrant. So you can re-import your OpenAPI doc and we merge the changes for you. Because it's declarative and it's not imperative code, this works much better. So we're very against the idea of software factories at Zuplo, and that's why we have dynamically generated MCP servers. So let's go and take a look. What we're going to do is go over to Zuplo. I'm going to create a new project. We're not creating an MCP gateway. This is a new type of gateway for Zuplo that allows you to manage your use of MCPs externally. We're actually going to create an API management product. I'm going to call this MCP demo. I'll create an empty project and that'll be ready in about 10 to 20 seconds. That'll be live at 300 data centers around the world, very scaled. I now need to import an OpenAPI document. So I'm just going to go over here and import that now. Here we go. We can see it's a to-dos API, so it's CRUD, get to-dos, post to-dos, put to-dos. You get the idea. Now, this is a very simple API. Let's just save my changes. That will deploy the change to the edge in about 5 seconds or so, 5 to 10 seconds. And I can actually test it using my test client here. And you'll see that the example API I'm using here is not secured. So we're going to add some security in Zuplo. We're actually going to add API key authentication. So let's do that. We'll add API key auth policy. We'll add that to all of our endpoints just quickly here. Great. Let's save that. And then now we've got a somewhat secured API. I could add rate limiting, very easy. I could make that rate limiting work on API key basis, very, very trivial. Let's go and test that. Yep, I've got no API key. So now I get a 401 unauthorized, which is what I want. Great, fantastic. Let's go and generate an API key so I can actually call this service again. So I'll do that by going over here to my services. I'll create a consumer. I'm going to call this test. I'll make Josh at Zuplo.com the manager of this key. And then I'm going to add some roles stuff here. So don't worry, we'll use that later in the demo, but I just added a bit of random metadata. There is my key. I could get it here, but actually remember, one of the great things about Zuplo is that the developer portal is dynamically generated by that same OpenAPI doc. So just by using Zuplo, you get this gorgeous developer portal that you can see here. Has a built-in test client. It wants me to log in because it knows I need an API key. So I'm going to log in as Josh at Zuplo.com. And that will load in my API key so I can call my API. So let's just try that. Go to the test. I'm going to try it without authentication. Yep, there we go. I get a 401 unauthorized. Now let's test it. Look at this beautiful test client that we have here in Zuplo. I'm going to test. Now we get a 200. Okay, great. So we just created a secure API. We imported it from our Swagger document, and we have a developer portal. This developer portal can look really beautiful, by the way. If you haven't already seen, AccuWeather just went live on Zuplo a few weeks back, and this is what their gorgeous developer portal looks like, powered by Zuplo. You see it has light, dark mode. It's very styled to their business, has monetization built in, and uses the extensibility of our open source developer portal here, Sudoku. So you can make this look as good as that. This is the vanilla version without anything added. So let's go back to Zuplo. So we've achieved a few things here. We have set up an API. We've put a gateway in front of it. In this case, though you don't need to if you already have auth in your API, we've added API key authentication, and we've got a developer portal. You can turn that off as well if you don't need it. Now what I want to do is solve this problem. I want my LLM here to be able to talk to my API, and so I need an MCP server. Let me show you just how easy that is in Zuplo. So we go back over to our code view here. I come here and I click add a new endpoint, which is going to be an MCP server. You can have as many MCP servers as you like. Actually, I'm going to create two. I'm going to call this MCP read only, and then I'm going to add another MCP server, which is MCP. And I'm going to select some tools for this. For this one, for this MCP full, I'm going to select everything. So all of my tools are available. And then for MCP read only, I'm going to create a toolkit, as some people are calling it in the MCP space, that only has the non-mutating methods. So the get all to do. So let's update that. I'm going to save that. And then in 5 to 10 seconds, we will have a fully capable MCP server ready to be used by OpenAI or Claude or whatever your favorite tool is. So that is deployed. So let's go and try that out now. So I'm going to go over to platform, the OpenAI Playground here. I have a penchant for 4.0 because it's a little bit faster and tends to do less reasoning. And then I'm going to add my MCP server. So let's just go and grab that URL. We're going to use which one should we use? We'll use the read-only one. So we'll copy that, pop over here, add an MCP server, choose the read only. So I'm going to call it to do read only, and it needs an API key. Well, good news, I've got one. I'll just go over to my API keys here, copy that. And if I showed you this key, oops, you know, built into Zuplo is things like rolling the key. So I'm actually going to get that key rolled. There you go, I've got a new key now. This one, I don't need it anymore, so I can delete it. I'm going to leave that for now. And I'm going to come over here and pop this into here. Oh, I'm not allowed special characters. So I assume we can have an underscore. Yeah. So we're going to connect that. That's going to connect my LLM. Notice it only has visibility of the get all to-dos. That's because we're using the MCP read-only toolkit that we've created here. And let's ask it a question. Get me all the to-dos. And so this will now call the LLM. The LLM will talk to this, the MCP client, which will then ask for my approval. This just depends on the tooling that you're using. I am going to approve this and say, yep, you are good to go. Okay, so now it'll call my API and it actually comes back with the to-do items. So wow, we just went from, API to MCP server with an explanation in a matter of minutes. And customers have put this live. One of our customers, Finn Solution, just did a video interview with us about how quickly they managed to get their MCP server live. And we have some incredible other clients doing this as well, more of which we'll talk about soon. What I want to show you now is some of that customization, that governance. So let's just imagine a scenario here where I want, let's pretend that I want to make this this get all to-dos item only callable by somebody with admin privileges. And if you remember, when I created my API key here, let's go and look at this. I set it to have a basic role. So we're going to create a custom policy in Zuplo. So we're going to create custom code, but it's going to interlay very slickly here and not be full foul of the fallacy of software factories. Okay, so I'm going to come in here. I'm going to create a new policy because the policy is applied declaratively. I'm going to add a new module, an inbound policy called RBAC for roles-based access control. It's going to be very simple. I'll zoom in this here a bit for you. I'm going to set up the options for my policy. I'm going to say role is of type string. Okay. And then the policy is going to very quickly just say if request.user.data.roles.includes options.role, then return request. That means continue. It means it's happy. The user is in the right role. Otherwise, we're going to turn new response. Computer says no. And we will make that a status. Let's do a 403. Okay, so we just created our first policy. And I am going to go and apply that to this route. Now notice we're applying this to the API endpoint. You can also do it in the MCP server as well, but it's actually going to make more sense for me to do it here. So I'm going to add a custom policy, custom code policy, specify the module I just created, and we're going to say to call this route, you need admin permissions, okay? This is very important. The authorization in your API needs to carry forward into your MCP server usage. So if you remember, the API key we created doesn't have that permission. So what happens if I ask it to fetch that again, please? Hopefully it'll recognize it should call the to-do service. It does, and it calls it. And I'm expecting that we get a nasty error, and that error is the computer says no. That is the governance carrying forward into our OpenAPI. Because this code is added declaratively, so it's in here recommended as a policy. You'll see it's applied here as a policy, this custom code inbound policy. I can re-import my OpenAPI document as many times as I like, and we will merge in the changes without changing those declarative policies. So you are not falling foul of this fallacy of software factories that is such a problem with a lot of MCP today. The other thing you get from Zuplo is we manage the upgrade to the MCP server for you. So if MCP changes, we typically ship an update based on the spec within a week or so. If there's security vulnerabilities, if there's those things come out, Zuplo's just going to update that for you. You won't need to do anything. It's just part of the managed service. So a much cleaner way of taking your APIs and shipping them as MCP servers. Go try it up, sign up for free at portal.zuplo.com.